listening to Keeping It Real with Janine, your guide to living an authentic, healthy life podcast. I'm Janine Strong, and every 2 weeks I have an inspiring conversation with an ordinary person leading an extraordinary life. And today, Dr. Matt Flory is back on the podcast to talk about perimenopause. Dr. Matt Flory is the founder of the Functional Health Team. As a doctor practicing functional medicine, Dr. Flory specializes in holistically treating inflammation and inflammation-related complaints. Dr. Flory's team of health detectives utilize functional medicine's unique diagnostic procedures and largely natural treatments with a focus on methylation and nutrigenomics. It's a mouthful. Welcome back to the podcast, Matt.
I'm here. Oh no, was the internet drop?
Maybe it did. I don't know.
Yeah, just all of a sudden you were gone.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, hopefully that won't happen again.
Yeah.
Now, perimenopause is a pretty big topic. And, you know, from my perspective, it really does affect everyone at one point or another, even if you're not a female, because if you're a woman having difficulty managing this time, it can affect all of those who are around her too. So how about if we start with just what is perimenopause?
Sure, I think that's a very astute observation you made right there. I think, yeah, absolutely. Well, Janine, women tend to think that they are getting into perimenopause, and traditional kind of medical thought supports and says that they're getting into perimenopause, and it's around a drop in estrogen levels leading to hot flashes. This is just kind of the typical progression, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the need to go on estrogen from there. And I think through the conversation today, we should be able to really bring more of a framework to that, understanding it at a deeper level. That isn't quite the case. It's not as simple as that. But as you know, and if any of your listeners have heard some of our previous discussions, that's often the case with the topics that you and I talk about. And I try not to be a little too heavy on the information, but I do believe that education and understanding is paramount to being able to manage, especially our health, right? But really, any and all problems effectively. And so there's these misunderstandings there, centered around this focus on estrogen levels dropping, right, bottoming out, and the traditional kind of hot flashes. But in reality, what we know is that between average age, let's say 35 to 50, right, where these sorts of changes might start happening, and during this time period, estrogen levels will drop maybe by about say 35% or so, around a third, give or take some. But progesterone levels, those drop by a 75%.
Oh wow!
Right, and so there's really other physiologic or biochemical, however you want to look at it, changes that are occurring that are of a greater magnitude, should I say, than if we were to just say focus on estrogen. Okay. Right. So we can kind of talk about, as we get later, I know we're going to probably dip into symptoms associated with things. We can certainly talk about, we can talk about, lower progesterone, because really that's likely an earlier and maybe more appropriate focus or indicator in our health, a driver of treatment, a driver of support.
Okay.
Right.
So what might be some of the early symptoms that a person, I think what happens a lot of times is somebody will start having symptoms but don't really realize what it is. And then later looking back, oh yeah, I was starting perimenopause.
Sure. And some of that we need to kind of frame. Well, when could this start? When could it end? How long can it last? Right?
Mm-hmm.
We've got to kind of understand the time frame in relationship to symptoms, as well as as well as maybe what those symptoms are, because what we're going to see as we talk about symptoms or conditions is that there's associated conditions, there's associated symptoms, there's confusing symptoms, right? Things that
Mm-hmm.
could,
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes you and I talk about crossover symptoms,
Right. Yes.
and so these may be something that is misdiagnosed, or maybe the way I like to say it, more misrecognized. You call it one thing and really maybe it's another, or maybe it's a condition that is laying a foundation for the development of. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of interplay here. But
Got
if
it.
we look at that time frame, again, this is, I mentioned 35 to 50, a 15-year range, right, of some of those hormone level drops. And when we look at perimenopause specifically itself, that's also a pretty broad range, right? On
Mm-hmm.
average, it could last, 6 to say 13 years on average, right?
Okay.
So it could be over a decade
Wow.
that somebody's
Mm-hmm.
going through, just through these, these changes in health kind of observations,
Okay.
right, of what's
Mm-hmm.
going on with them. Specifically, perimenopause is defined as that period of time beginning when abnormal hormonal fluctuations begin, or the normal kind of hormonal cycle is disrupted, through to 1 year after the last period. Okay, so
Okay.
you can't truly say you're through this time period, uh, until it's been 12 months since the last bleed,
Okay.
right?
Got it.
So that's one it's one framework that we have to kind of be operating in, and we can kind of use to start defining this period of time,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll find that uh, when we get into the specifics of symptoms, we'll find that a lot of them have a high dependence on our stress levels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our diet and lifestyle, and so that's a characteristic to keep in mind, both in terms of symptoms, as well as where treatment and support goes. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then you have to also recognize, due to the fact that there's so much variation in lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
diet, right? The stresses in our life, that the symptomatic pattern can be supremely different for different women,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's, on one hand, we're saying, okay, we've got a very broad topic here we're going to cover, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and on the other, we'll try to bring some semblance of order and organization to that by talking a little bit about about specifics, but again, about the broader brush strokes, right,
Right.
that create this. So really, in perimenopause, it's the absolute wrong time to go on estrogen, and you don't want to do this. Maybe, and we can get into this until you're fully into menopause, but that really is kind of the wrong time to do it, when you just start to have these symptoms, right? When
Okay.
you're just starting to suspect it, and then to get into some of the, like we called it, crossover signs, symptoms, and get into some of the specifics. Some of these will mimic hormone imbalance, and some will be linked to the cause of hormone imbalance. So again, we might have a misdiagnosis, a misrecognition of the condition, of the complaint that someone is having, or it may be a foundational imbalance that's leading to. So things we can point our fingers at are headaches, right?
Okay.
And what we got to think of here is, okay, yes, this can be a hormonal imbalance sign or a symptom. It can also be a sign of blood sugar dysregulation
Mm-hmm.
in anyone, right?
Right.
Blood sugar crashes, especially when it's associated with anxiety, maybe a short fuse, things, sweating,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So it's important to discern this from blood sugar problems. Insulin resistance is something that would definitely be in the conversation in terms of when we're talking about hot flashes.
Mm-hmm.
We will touch back on this. Okay, so
Could you define insulin resistance?
yeah, it's a very common foundational and functional dysregulation of the metabolism of the body, right? We take
Mm-hmm.
our carbohydrate, we take glucose, and we oxidize it. So using oxidation respiration, our method of metabolism in the human body, and we create energy from it,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so insulin resistance is a condition where and there isn't just one cause, right? There's lots of different factors involved in it, but it is going to be a sign of this loss of proper metabolic function, loss of proper oxidation and creation of energy, right? So
Mm-hmm.
insulin resistance, the insulin goes up, and so because insulin is responsible for getting glucose into your cells,
Okay.
the glucose goes up, right? And so most people don't are never alerted to this because of a insulin measurement maybe themselves, but their blood sugar, their glucose will just gently start to rise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our optimal glucose levels should be really within the 85 to 90 top end range,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
If we get up into the 93, 95, 97s, even though their medical doctor, their primary care physician, none of them are going to get excited about that. I'm going to get a little bit excited about that because
Mm-hmm.
that's a sign of insulin resistance creeping in,
Okay.
right? So
Okay.
that's a little. Any other questions about insulin resistance, or does that kind of help
No,
out there?
that's yeah. I just thought because a lot of people may not really know what that means, so I wanted
Sure.
to. Good.
And it's one of the foundational things to treat with many disorders, because it will exist for decades before
Mm-hmm.
a diabetes kicks in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before type 2 diabetes kicks in. So, but
How do you treat it?
well, there's a lot of options there. So it's very effectively, you know me, I am a big food as medicine
Yeah.
proponent.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certainly dietary and nutritional strategies, how you set up your process of daily intake of nutrients, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When do you eat a higher ratio of healthy fats and proteins? When do you bring your carbohydrates in throughout the day? There's a awareness that we can bring with a simple home test to what kind of carbohydrate producer are you in the first place? And this is a
Mm.
genetic foundationally a genetic question. And so there's an easy home test you can do to say, okay, well, on a day-to-day basis, what percentage of my calories and intake should be proteins versus carbs versus fats, right? There should be
Cool.
there's three different categories of people. So certainly the food is medicine category. I almost always do add in some supplementation because there's a number of herbals and herbal blends out there that help to improve the effectiveness of insulin on the cell membrane.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of cell membranes,
Mm-hmm.
there's a broader what we would call condition of hormone resistance that is not necessarily an insulin or a thyroid hormone problem, but it's a cell membrane problem where our cells themselves are becoming less reactive and responsive to all of our hormones, let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's also something that can be treated with supplementation and diet. So then there's exercise methods that are effective for improving insulin's effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
There are interesting little biological hacks, like say at the end of a warm shower, turning on just the cold water for, say, 3 to 5 minutes, right? Or going out in the cold itself, outdoors, and spending some time in the cold. These things stimulate a enzyme in our bodies called AMPK. And whether it's, supplementation, diet, exercise, or a myriad of interesting little, biological hacks, there's many ways we can influence the processing of glucose and the effectiveness of insulin in the body.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. I'm not sure I like the cold water part, but
So many people don't, but hey, it's free medicine, right? Is the way I
yeah,
look
that's
at
true.
it.
I mean, it would certainly be worth a try.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I would, granted, please nobody go out and think that alone is going to do it and overdo it, right? We don't want
Mm-hmm.
anyone harming themselves, but put together with these other factors, there's a lot of effectiveness there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
So back on the headaches,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's the insulin resistance, blood sugar dysregulation, but we also have to look at a crossover condition of central nervous system chronic inflammation. And this is something that often manifests in fibromyalgia, migraines, or just chronic headaches. This is something that is the foundations of which reside on bacterial overgrowth, frequently bacterial overgrowth in the gut. Potentially other forms of dysbiosis leading to gut inflammation, but small intestine bacterial overgrowth is a very common etiology or a very common source for this.
Right.
So, and then, then this will lead to vitamin nutrient deficiencies and just kind of snowball from there.
Mm-hmm.
Other crossover signs, symptoms that you might notice through this period of time, depression. So, your neurotransmitter balance begins in the gut. And I think we've talked about that in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It's very quickly imbalanced, your neurotransmitters, by poor absorption of nutrients, other downstream effects of inflammation, such as poor detoxification, poor methylation, all things that we'll touch upon here today, and we've talked about, maybe more at length in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Yeast and candida problems will tend to show up. This may be earlier on in perimenopause. Infertility, certainly due to some of the hormone, if the hormone imbalance is bad enough, if it's great enough. Fatigue. So again, this may be related to some of the glucose processing issues in the mitochondria, which is kind of what we were describing earlier in terms of those treatments for insulin resistance, some of the mitochondrial dysfunction, because mitochondria have a very intimate role in this conversation about hormones.
Okay.
Cholesterol, many people will be surprised to hear this, but cholesterol is converted by the mitochondria. It's in the across the mitochondrial membrane. It's converted from cholesterol into pregnenolone, and pregnenolone is kind of like a raw material for the sex hormones.
Okay.
It's a raw material for the sex hormones, for cortisol, and for aldosterone, which aldosterone has some relationship or has responsibility in regulating blood pressure, right? We talked about cortisol before, probably a little bit more recognizable for people, and its association with inflammation and maybe leading to adrenal fatigue, adrenal dysfunction. But then the third one, the third hormone group, let's call it family, that is part of this cholesterol to pregnenolone raw material supply chain, are the sex hormones. So there's an intimate relationship, as we talked later about within all of these either substrates, raw materials, hormone families, and that sort of a thing. So fatigue can be involved there, both with the adrenal issues, mitochondrial issues, those sorts of things. Any of the inflammatory conditions, right, are going to have a potential for brain fog. So there's another one.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Yeah. Heart palpitations are not uncommon. Liver dysfunction and sluggishness of the liver is one that is important here with our crossover with hormonal processing and hormonal balance in the body. And one reason this is such a important thing to have knowledge of in your own body is that non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is, if it's not I think it is the quickest growing condition, right, in our developing countries. It's right up there if it isn't the top, but I'm pretty sure it is. I've I see it's cited as the top very frequently. And why would that be? Why would you think that would be if the liver dysfunction is one of the quickest growing conditions? What would make sense to you regarding that?
Toxins?
You got it, right? And especially when it is in the developing countries where this is growing the most. Then we have allergies. A lot of people would not necessarily relate that to hormonal dysfunction, but a lot of times this will show up. Okay, weight control issues is definitely there. Memory issues, especially on short-term memory and processing. Thyroid issues. Kind of touched upon thyroid a bit. Arthritis, and interestingly enough, a lot of joint pain in older females. Or females in perimenopause or menopause is a sign of low estrogen or progesterone.
Oh, interesting.
So heart disease, and then just to round out everything, sleep disorders, right? So you won't sleep, you may not sleep well either.
Which exacerbates everything.
You got it. Absolutely right.
Wow. So this is pretty complex to figure out what is going on with each individual person. I can see where the idea of being a health detective is so intriguing for you.
Yeah, we have to touch upon detoxification. We have to touch upon, what we're getting out of our bodies. We have to touch upon what we're putting in our bodies, right? The nutrition, the supplementation. We have to touch upon risk factors for, major conditions like breast cancer and things like that. So we'll hit as we, wrap up. As we're wrapping up through today, we'll touch upon these things and kind of shed some more light on them.
So what do you recommend? So let's say that someone is starting to have some symptoms. Is there something in let's say a more general way that I suppose looking at their diet, that would be a good place to start, seeing what their sugar intake is like, kinds of foods they're eating, alcohol intake, carbohydrate.
Sure. Yes. Those are some very important. There's citations time after time after time in the research literature about caffeine. Remove it at least until you get things balanced and you can establish patterns of balance in the hormones, right? Then at that point, there may be, an option for kind of bringing it back in. You mentioned remove the sugar. Absolutely. Those are very top level necessities when you're cleaning up the gut, which is kind of maybe a broader recommendation, right? When we want to bring balance to the hormones. You never want to supplement hormones based upon symptoms only. So you really do need to have an understanding and awareness, maybe through testing, or where is that client in this process of perimenopause, menopause, right? Because at the beginning, again, your estrogen is not depleting as rapidly as other hormones. And what's really happening is your body's going through spurts, little spikes or cycles of actually increased estrogen, because it may be lowering a bit, but then it's going to kind of tip the scales back the other way, right? And so these are just things you need to be aware of. You need to be aware that cholesterol medications are going to be important when you're attempting to rebalance hormone levels, right? I just outlined how cholesterol is literally the raw material that feeds into all of those hormones that we mentioned. And so manipulating the cholesterol down, right, through a medication, or even people might use red rice yeast. I've seen that to bring that's a natural way to bring cholesterol down. But even that again is going to influence your availability of certain hormones. Right. The raw materials. So, other recommendations that are within this question of balancing hormones, and some of this might sound familiar from what we've, kind of already talked about potentially, but exercise, right? So certain sorts of exercise are going to reduce the intensity and duration of hot flashes. Why is exercise going to do that? Well, it's going to help improve some very basic functional issues with mitochondria, insulin effectiveness, and therefore on up the line.
So what would be the best kind of exercise that might affect?
Well, yeah, the nice part is you have a lot of variety here. It's not like you have to go out and run or something, right? You don't have to swim. So what you really want to do here is you want to do interval style of exercise, right? So pick your poison, pick what you like. It's just how you do it that's important. So for mitochondrial health, whatever you're doing, you want to, in a exercise session, and you may not be able to start here, that's all right, but you want to work up for maximal result. You want to work up to where you're getting 9 peaks within you of elevated into the cardio zone, right, for heart rate.
Okay.
And then once you get up there, then you maybe, if you've been biking, you slow down. If you've been running, then you walk, right? You go ahead and you decrease that intensity, monitoring your pulse, monitoring your respirations until you get back into just kind of the normal zone. Okay. And then you ramp it back up again intensity wise. And you do that 9 times is where you're having the most ideal effect on mitochondria. And what you're doing is you're actually literally killing off the weaker of the mitochondria, and the mitochondria themselves replicate. They have their own DNA. Some of the mitochondrial genome is actually, linked to some autoimmune disease and things like that too. And so that's just kind of something to tuck back in the back of the head, to know that could be involved there. But you're killing off the weaker mitochondria so that while you're eating right, while you are maybe taking some supplementation to support mitochondrial health, that the new ones being produced are being supported by that nutrition and supplementation. They're being supported to be healthier than what you killed off. It's a survival of the fittest kind of situation, kind of almost a Darwinian, right? Kind of a turnover in population.
Oh, that's fascinating. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand before, because I know I get I get emails from like Dr. Mercola and some other people. He's big on interval, but I never really understood like why, the underlying physiology. So thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly why. And then to kind of round out the list of where do we need to apply focus for the kind of the general rebalancing hormones process. Liver detox is a must, and I think that'll become more and more apparent as we get here into talking about estrogens, the recycling of estrogens, the detoxification, its relationship to breast cancer and things like that. And then there's many other specific and unique nutritional supplement strategies that's really just too kind of broad to go into all of them here, that relate to, okay, on a test we get back, are we looking at low progesterone, high progesterone, low estradiol, high estradiol, low testosterone, high testosterone, right? Those sorts of specifics. That's probably just a little too. It's a conversation to get into for my full day seminar on hormones, right? Not so
So,
much.
so speaking about tests, what do
Yeah.
you recommend? Because you could do blood tests, you can do saliva, you can do urine. There are a lot of different ways to test for the estrogens, progesterone, and testosterone. What do you recommend as the
Yeah.
most accurate?
There are. This is a bit of an interesting conversation, but it's not too lengthy. We can kind of really hone in on it. Blood testing is good, or you might say good enough, right, for some of the hormones. And the reason why you might say that, there's testing like dried urine testing, a test called the Dutch test, that I
Hmm.
would say is maybe a gold standard for giving you accuracy.
Hmm.
But the reason why blood testing is still in the conversation, number one, it's convention, right?
Right.
It's typically what is going to be done by your primary care physician. And there really is a ton of research out there on a number of the hormones as related to their levels in blood. And so blood, I think, is still quite useful, although it does have its downfalls, right? Now,
Hmm.
certain hormones that seem to have the most reliable information in terms of blood testing are estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, one called DHEA that
Hmm.
can be converted into the sex hormones. So those are some pretty good ones with blood. Urine is, I think, when we're talking about breaking down estrogen into either the cancer protective or cancer stimulating, driving estrogen metabolites, okay,
Okay.
the byproducts of breaking it down,
Hmm.
getting rid of it. That's certainly a urine test, okay?
Okay.
And then the methylation of some of these hormone metabolites, that's definitely a urine test too. There are some out there that'll test saliva. There's just not as much research on those. I can't, and I don't, not too many people I think would say that they're just completely unreliable,
Hmm.
right? It's
Hmm.
just that there's less information backing up some of the clinical decisions that can be made. Does that make some
Hmm.
sense?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're talking about the breaking down the hormones and the metabolites, does that happen in the liver, or where does that happen?
Right. So these conversion of hormones from one form to another happens all over the body. Okay,
Okay.
specifically, yes, the breakdown, at least the methylation process. Methylation is a phase 2 liver detoxification reaction. So
Hmm.
that certainly happens there. But some of these conversions can happen, in various cells in our body, both in terms of creating hormones and breaking them down. Uh,
Hmm.
and one of the things, interestingly enough, that can lead to such imbalances in hormones is the fact that there's a high concentration of enzymes in adipose cells, in fat cells, that will
Ah.
convert, right? Will convert these hormones, and so therefore there's a wide variety between two different people, right? How much adipose tissue they have, and what the influences are going to be on their hormonal balance. So
So Matt, what
yeah.
happens if somebody's losing weight?
What happens if somebody's losing weight? Well, generally that's going to be a good thing, because
Right, but what happens to if the hormones that are stored in the adipose tissue?
well, some hormones will say stored there, but really it's kind of this enzyme that converts the hormones. And so
Oh,
more than when you lose weight, all of a sudden, I'm going to say this. This is not so much the concern that all of us. It's not so much a concern. You're losing weight, so you're dumping a bunch of hormones into your system.
okay. Okay.
right? It's more of the concept that if you're losing weight, you're burning these fat cells, these storage cells, maybe reducing the amount of them, and so therefore your hormonal balance has a better opportunity to achieve balance because there's less of an influence of these aromatase enzymes or enzymes within the fat cells that are going to put their foot on the scales, right? Put their foot on the
Mm-hmm.
teeter-totter of hormonal balance. Does it make
Okay.
sense how I was framing that,
Mm-hmm.
or did
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, I think that does. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I thought that's something that, I've wondered about, that if you're storing or holding
Yeah,
hormones in the fat tissue, then what
yeah.
happens when you start losing weight? Does that create an
Well,
imbalance of some sort?
and that's a great logical question. And so, there's losing weight. There's a number of positive effects of that. Hormone balance can be one of them. The thing that you do want to be aware of if you are losing weight is that a number of toxins are stored in the fat cells, right? Some
Okay.
of these toxins, while they may not be a hormone themselves, they could be what we term a xenoestrogen,
Okay.
okay, or a estrogen lookalike, an estrogen. It acts like estrogen. It's an imitator of estrogen, and we might as well just say this now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Estrogen is responsible for growth and proliferation of tissue in our body. Okay,
Okay.
this is desirable when there's a developing life form in our body,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
this is maybe undesirable when there's not,
Right.
right? We don't
Right.
want, right? Growth and proliferation of tissue is a hallmark of cancer. Right.
Right.
So
Right.
this is where we start to get in and bridge into this conversation. So these xenoestrogens that, yes, those could be stored in fat cells. It's quite possible, as well as whatever we're taking in from our environment. And make a note, we need to cover the environmental inroads that we bring on some of these xenoestrogens and other toxins before we're done today. But knowing that we could be dumping these while we lose weight, it doesn't it doesn't mean we shouldn't lose weight. There's way too many benefits, right, for
Oh,
for burning
yes,
that adipose
absolutely.
tissue and coming to a healthy weight. But we may again, it's why I mentioned that part of a overall balancing protocol maybe is going to involve some sort of liver detoxification support, maybe liver regeneration support, depending on the health of the liver.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why that's going to be an important component, because you could be dumping these lookalikes, these imitators of
Mm-hmm.
estrogen.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. So Matt, if I could just step back a moment, because when you said estrogens involved in proliferation of tissue, would
Hmm.
that mean that if you had a serious injury, would your estrogen levels go up to promote the growth of new healthy tissue? Or am I just off
As part
base
of that,
there?
as
I
as
just,
part of that, so as part of that healing
yeah,
process, you're
I was
saying?
just curious.
There's a lot that's going to go on within the hormonal balance, okay, during that time. And yes, there are going to be influences on estrogen levels. The stress response, okay, that's induced during recovery from, and it could be a physical injury, it could be an emotional trauma, right, Janine?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so all of these are important here, but the important concept here is that when you're undergoing that stress response, okay, your body's going to be utilizing things like well, all of your metabolic processes, so your blood sugar, these just the raw materials your body needs to carry out regeneration and tissue healing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is again is going to then dive into the sex hormones as well as cortisol and the whole. You got to kind of think of the overall hormonal balance as a boat, right? And it's going to rock the boat big time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to
Mm-hmm.
be there's going to be a lot of shifting of of this boat. There's going to be a lot of shifting of all of these hormones around and kind of sloshing around. So it certainly is something that has to be considered as part of the healing process from an injury.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it just, I mean, I may be off here, but it just struck me that with what you're saying, that if someone has a serious injury, that could really mess up your hormones and
Yeah,
make it difficult to recover from.
absolutely. There's the growth and proliferation driven by estrogen. There's growth factor. There's all sorts of implications that'll happen there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Well, now that we've gotten off on a couple of different tracks, I can't remember where we were. So,
No problem. Let's see.
Let's see.
So we were kind of touching upon estrogens, breakdown, breast cancer. We definitely want to hit the breast cancer, right?
Okay, go ahead.
Some of
Mm-hmm.
that sort of. So where breast cancer risk comes into play is in the conversation about estrogen,
Okay.
right? And there's a couple major categories or a couple major topics we can talk about here. We've got either the balance of estrogen, we've got the balance of how we break down estrogen, and then we've got those xenoestrogens, those lookalikes
Mm-hmm.
that are kind of major topics in this discussion. So
What are some of the
Yeah.
xenoestrogens, Matt?
Sure. Some of the xenoestrogens are going to be things like are some of the plastics, right? So this is where
Okay.
we get into, BPA free and
Mm-hmm.
the importance of that. Some of the liners they put in canned foods,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Some of our sources of xenoestrogens are car exhaust fumes. Of the food sources, there's hormones that are found in meats and in dairy, animal products. There's sprayed plastics on fruits and veggies that make them more attractive for selling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's food dyes that are another source.
What about soy?
In our soy? Yes. So you're safer with soy if you're doing a fermented form.
Okay.
I'll just kind of to keep it simple like that.
Okay.
But yes, that is something that should be watched. But the fermented sours, your miso, your tempeh, those sorts of things are generally healthier.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the big questions with soy too is it's common. It can commonly be an inflammatory trigger for people, and so then you kind of feed that information back into higher up in the conversation when we were talk about gut health, right? And its implications on the whole cascade of events that can trigger hormonal imbalance. But personal care products are something that has to be looked at and really you just need to rotate out your old chemical laden personal care products and introduce good essential oil based natural sourced produced personal care products, your soaps, your shampoos, your lotions. If people need a good source of this, they can always, kind of talk to us because we've got great suppliers of these sorts of products. Home furnishings you have to watch out for. off-gassing from things like the plastics in our countertops or paneling, wood paneling, our new carpeting, our new furniture, our new drapes that have flame retardants and things like this sprayed on them as safety, and you can't hardly get around this. I mean, these are production. Yeah, I mean, these are production. These are regulatory compliance factors by the producers of these goods that they have to do on these things. And again, with carpeting, our Scotch Guard, right? All these sorts of things we might use. So what are we using to clean our carpets if we have carpet, right? All these questions are questions that need to be asked. Our vehicles, that new car smell, Janine? Not so good for your hormonal balance, we'll say. Okay. Glyphosate comes into this conversation. And so, whether it's these things or we're talking about a pesticide because they imbalance the gut microbiome and therefore lead to methylation problems and therefore lead to hormonal disruption. You're right when you say it can get very complicated. Just these are all factors, and you need to be supported by somebody who can look at that bigger picture. And it's not going to happen. And obviously it's not going to happen in 4 to 6 weeks, right? With all these factors going on, right? So
I know it. Okay. So the sense that I'm getting is that this can be really overwhelming. And I can see people just going, whatever, there's just so much. How to make this not overwhelming? How to make it so that somebody can take a first step and, because especially if you're feeling like crap, right? It's hard to have the energy. Like somebody might be listening to this and going, "Oh my God, I don't have the energy to to deal with this."
Yeah, absolutely. I applaud those that are willing to take responsibility and a role in their own health. But like you said, especially when you're feeling crappy because of hormonal imbalance, because of autoimmune disease, whatever it is, in these topics that are overwhelming, that's why you don't do it yourself. Okay. First step. So don't take too much on is my first suggestion, right? Find somebody that can look at the big picture for you and walk you down the road. Be expecting that if you're going to make dietary changes, if you're going to work on detoxification, expect that it's going to take 3 to 6 months before you start to see shifts happening, so that you don't get discouraged too early on and throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So that's my number one suggestion is reading blogs, watching videos, listening to podcasts, even like we're doing. I applaud those, but trying to take that information and do with it yourself that's probably the most overwhelming thing I see in real life with real clients, right? So find somebody to support you. Okay, is number one.
Right.
Second, it's going to be starting to change some of the diet, right? That's again, food is medicine, and it's going to trickle into so many different aspects of balancing hormones. Do you have to do it all at once, or can somebody just start with one thing? Like maybe, I know sugar's so hard for most people, but okay. So one of the things that I do is I don't do any cane sugar. So that doesn't mean I can't have sweets. I created the most wonderful truffle brownies, but so I use honey, I use maple syrup, I use things like that. So, but if you don't just not doing cane sugar cuts out a lot of stuff that you can't do and forces you to at least use healthier sweeteners. It does.
It's a place to start.
It is a place to start. A concept a one single concept I like to do. I actually one single concept I do with everyone I work with is they do a 14 to 21 day challenge on eating only real food. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
this is going to cut out the sugar without focusing on sugar, for
Got
one
it.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the purpose of doing this challenge is, number one, I actually tell people I don't care if you're successful, right, for the 14 or the 21 days. In fact, I expect there to be failures. That's okay. The importance is that you're going to answer some questions at the end of that 14 to 21 days that's going to help us know what was difficult about it, right? Are there social situations? Are there individual habits? Are there stress responses? Okay, and then we can kind of line up your support based upon what those needs are. The other thing is here too is that in that 14 to 21 days of eating only real food, somebody's focusing on that rather than, oh, not sugar, not sugar, not sugar, just not to go too far off, but an old adage I remember, an old saying within some of these conversations is, the more we focus on not something, the more we bring that into our life.
Right. Right.
So the more cravings we bring in, if we're thinking, oh, I got to go not sugar, because what happens I see when people do this real food challenge is
Mm-hmm.
they start to lose a taste for sugar
Mm-hmm.
frequently. Now, that's not everybody. And if you literally have cravings, then that actually is a super important piece of information for someone like myself, meaning we've got a mitochondria problem. We
Mm-hmm.
have to do the mitochondrial um, uh, uh, focus,
Got
right?
it.
And work there. So I like to put people on the real food challenge. Number one, for a large percentage of people, it's extremely motivating because they feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they
Mm-hmm.
recognize this sort of a thing. Maybe their carb cravings or sugar cravings, they go away on their own. And so by focusing on one positive thing, we can kind of have the effects of maybe something like just an elimination of sugar,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, if we think about the mindset, the framework of what's going on when somebody's trying to eliminate sugar, they're like, okay, I'm going to abstain from sugar. I'm going to abstain from sugar. Again, they're thinking about it. They're kind of getting this not sugar effect on bringing it, having it on the top of their minds. But then they also are going to be more prone to do what? Well, things like, okay, well, I if I'm going to be so good on eliminating sugar, well, then I'm going to have a cheat day, right?
Mm-hmm.
As
Mm-hmm.
as part of my process of eliminating sugar. And so you're kind of eliminating sugar, you're not really eliminating sugar,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
that cheat day can have really detrimental effects on your physiology, and it can kind of screw up the whole thing. So while I am completely in favor of eliminating, reducing sugar, especially processed sugar, I do tend personally to go a different direction in terms of focusing someone on their dietary
Mm-hmm.
changes.
Okay, so let's say, Matt, I think this is might be really helpful for some people. So let's say somebody would really like to just give, say, 2 weeks. They'll allow themselves 2 weeks, and maybe as they go along, they'd want to do more of this real food, just to see how they feel, and see if they feel any different. So what would that entail? What, like, does real food mean you can't bake something? Or
Right. Great question. Frequently, your baked goods are going to be cut out during this time because
okay,
it's the processing of a food product into an edible food substance
okay, okay.
that that is one of the criteria. Okay, so the
Mm-hmm.
grains, and I'll tell you, we use here at home for some of our healthy, baked goods and treats, things like that, this great sunflower seed flour, and
Mm-hmm.
it's super healthy and it tastes great, but even that would be cut out on a real food challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to stick to your fruits, your vegetables. You're going to stick to your meats and proteins for whatever level is right for your preference or religious,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
affiliations, or
Mm-hmm.
just philosophies of life, whatever that is. And then the other level of that, I would say, is that you really want to do that safely too. So you need to know what this dirty dozen is when it comes to
Right.
toxicity, in the conversation of fruits and vegetables,
Mm-hmm.
and be adhering to uh, generally all organic when you're eating something that you don't remove the outer skin or peel or rind from,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
And
especially like strawberries, blueberries. I was just reading somebody did some testing on, I think it was kale and spinach, and there was something else, a bunch of different vegetables.
yeah,
And there was one other one, but the three, it was kale, spinach, and another one where they found the highest amount of pesticides.
right. Yeah, right. So that becomes really important. Something that can be done with foods that are not organic, so that they're going to have been sprayed. Something you can do as a next best option.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say that it's going to remove everything, but if you put a couple tablespoons of baking soda in water and
Okay.
let them soak for I think it's somewhere 10 to 20 minutes.
Okay.
Let the veggies or fruits soak in that, then it's going to remove a lot of the pesticides. It's going to remove a lot of the what's been sprayed on that vegetable or fruit. So that's one thing you can do in a pinch at home.
Oh, thank
But
you for that, because I didn't know that.
sure,
And, a lot of people just don't have access to organics. A lot of grocery stores will have like a little bit, here and there,
yeah,
but sometimes you just can't get it.
right, yeah. So that's your next best option when it comes to uh, being unable to
Mhm.
purchase
Mhm.
organic.
So that was 2 tablespoons of baking soda?
And this is a formula that I looked up online and found
Uh-huh.
online, right? But
Okay.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 2 tablespoons uh in and we usually use a glass pie or casserole dish, something like that. Dump the veggies in, fill it with water, throw a couple tablespoons of baking soda in, and mix it up.
Mhm. Mhm. And baking soda's cheap, so that's
It
an
is.
easy solution to at least help. Mhm. Okay, cool. So if you don't have access to organics, or for some reason, I mean, sometimes something that's organic is so much more expensive than a, I don't know what to call it, a regular like a
Well, you
regular
could,
item that,
yeah.
maybe you can't afford it. Although it's always good to check, because sometimes I found, like the other day I was looking at regular lettuce and organic lettuce, and for some reason the organic lettuce was less expensive. I'm like, wow, that's weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a place where a person can really just start on their own is really looking at what they're ingesting, what they're taking in, and looking at the plastics too. I didn't. Now, when you were talking about plastic on fruits and vegetables, are you talking about something they're coated with, or are you talking about like the plastic wrap that
Oh no, you would like to think it was just the plastic wrap.
geez, great.
Yeah, I mean, I just think back to these food photographers, right?
Mhm.
Have you ever
Mhm.
seen anything on that? How they spray the foods down to make it look more enticing for their
Right.
photographs and things like that. I don't know which came first, whether the photography techniques were developed and then that was maybe adopted a bit into our grocery stores for how they display foods, or
Oh, I
vice
see what.
versa.
Mhm. Mhm.
But the foods look better, right? And so we
Mm.
tend to buy them. So your more attractive vegetables and fruits might be the most unhealthy. You never know.
Huh. So what you're saying is they could be sprayed with some kind of a plastic. I mean, I know sometimes, what is it? Cucumbers have they'll have a waxy coating on them.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like I said, it seems overwhelming almost. So
Well,
let's.
I just want to real quickly point out that I get it, because I started working with people in functional medicine in a private practice traditionally, where you know what you do. You go into the doctor, you wait in the waiting room. Maybe you drive, hopefully 5 or 10 minutes, but maybe the good doctor is an hour away,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you sit in the waiting room for an appointment with the doctor. For a lot of functional medicine things, it's going to be cash out of pocket. For a lot of your insurance doesn't cover a lot of holistic stuff. So
Right.
now you're paying
Exactly.
cash out of pocket. How long of an appointment can you afford, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
15, 30 minutes. And so you've got to get all this information packed into a plan within that time, and then you leave and you've got a checkup, maybe in 8 or 12 weeks. And
Mm-hmm.
what happens when you have questions, on day 4, day
Mm-hmm.
5 after
Mm-hmm.
you leave?
Mm-hmm.
So, that's why I believe that a new model was needed for delivering a lot of this stuff, so it isn't so overwhelming, so you can do little bits at a time.
Got it.
And we don't have to go deep into that, but that's how I created Functional Health Team. It's structured in a way that it's just drips out little bits. Take one thing for this 30 days, work on it, and then move on, and just build yourself a foundation for good health to happen. Right?
Right.
Because our bodies are inherently going to respond to our environment, and it's about controlling that environment, whether we're trying to introduce through a bioidentical hormone blend, so that we're getting something or absorbing something from our environment that's going to balance our hormones, or whether we're going to eat right so that we're breaking down our and detoxifying well. It doesn't matter, right? It's when we control that environment in little bits that we create a foundation for getting better over time.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So before we wrap up, the one thing you just mentioned something, because I was racking my brain. I had a question for you and then I forgot it because I didn't write it down. And then you just happened to mention it. Bioidentical hormones versus, I don't know, what do you call regular hormones, or I'm not sure how to classify non-bioidentical. Why is it better to use bioidentical if you're going to use hormones? Why is it better to use bioidentical?
Well, so I'd say you have your bioidentical and you have your synthetics, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So the whole question of which is better can, in one sense, be talked about that they're actual hormones, right? They're literally physiologically active normal hormones. They're not a synthetic substance.
Okay.
And what they can do with bioidentical hormones differently, because a lot of your synthetics are going to be delivered through a capsule, a pill, some things like that, right?
Okay.
They're going to be mass manufactured. So they're going to be manufactured for broader groups of people.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This does not mean that you and your unique individual levels of hormones, which we said can vary greatly based upon the lifestyle, dietary, and stress factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
All these other factors, that mass manufactured intended to be broad spectrum delivered synthetic hormone is not going to match up with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the benefit with the bioidentical is that once you get the right testing done and you have your individual profile of hormones, and the doctor's good enough that they've assessed your stress levels, they've assessed your dietary needs, all of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then they can tailor not only some sort of support program, but they can tailor that bioidentical hormonal supplement, treatment, medication, if you will. People call it a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
They can tailor that through through a pharmacological process so it's unique for you,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
Hmm. So
So let's say someone's really motivated after listening to this. They'd really like to work with you or your team. Now you set up the functional health team as an internet service, so that people don't have to come to you physically, right?
that is true. The way I like to talk about it is it's really the utmost of convenience. I mean, you can have your appointment over your lunch break in your car. I have clients that do that sometimes, but the majority of them, and I recommend people do it, sitting in their comfy chair at home or on the
Mm-hmm.
couch,
Mm-hmm.
and being comfortable, being having privacy like that to be able to really get to work. And
Mm-hmm.
so yes, we do pretty much all of our one-on-one, our strategy sessions, the functional medicine strategy sessions. We do our either focus or transformational one-on-one support sessions, or our group classes. Those last ones that I mentioned, those last three, are educational and health coaching support. So I don't necessarily do all of them, but that's where the team comes in, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We've got the rest of team members that help in their areas of specialty support people in making these life changes. Maybe they know what life change they need to make. It's just hard to do because your
Yeah.
lifestyle. And
Yes.
so, I mean, that's where these expert health coaches are just hit home runs all the time, right? It's just helping you to get a handle on how can I make this work. I'm a big proponent of personally, when somebody tells me I can't do something or it's not possible, that's what gets me started thinking, okay, well, how is that going to actually work?
Mm-hmm.
We might have to be creative here. So, functional health team, the format is a creative design to deliver the support and the functional medicine strategy to clients in a more convenient, more accessible, and I feel a more doable way, something that is really going to help people actually be able to make these changes and make them last.
Mm-hmm. And how does it? What happens if somebody needs lab work? How does that
Oh,
work?
that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. Uh, Most of the tests that we do, a kit will be sent to your door or maybe your PO box, right? Whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, but they'll be
Mm-hmm.
sent to you in the mail. You do it. The lab tests it. We get the results. Now, for some of the blood testing, obviously you're not going to draw your own blood, or hopefully not, right? So, but we have contracts set up across the country. We have contracts set up where we can go in for extremely, extremely affordable rates and get the blood test done. In fact, our rates, I've never seen anyone out there, even with those companies that sell blood testing direct to consumers over the internet, our prices beat all the time. So I'm really proud of that. And then the other thing that's a reality of the blood testing is that we do try to utilize your primary care physician for every bit of good they can do for you,
Okay.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
the way it often looks is that we want to get some blood work done, or we need to get some blood work done. We'll create like the overall profile that we want to see. If you want to go that direction, you can take that into your primary care physician. They'll order a mere fraction of what we want to do because
Mm-hmm.
they're, and God love them, they're good people. It's just they're looking for pathology and they're in disease. They're looking for what's going to kill people, right?
Okay.
In a week. And what we're looking for is we're looking for deeper than that. We're looking for nuances in the blood work. We're
Mm-hmm.
looking for things that tell us that things aren't functioning optimally, not that you're about to keel over, right? So
Got it.
we let them do what they'll do, and then we go on the back end and we supplement what they did with the rest of what we need to see. And that
Mm-hmm.
generally makes it incredibly affordable for people.
Mm-hmm. Great. Awesome. So if somebody wants to contact you, what do they do?
Sure. Well, we have a toll-free number. That's 1-888-474-1888. We do have an email address that you can contact, info at functionalhealthteam.com. And then there's our good old website. We're not hiding it from anybody. There's a number of ways you can contact us on there, and information about our programs, and ways to get in touch with us to get more information.
Mm-hmm. And if people didn't get that, they're driving or whatever, and they can't write it down, all of this is on the podcast website too. And I think what I'll do is put links to our past podcast conversations, because we've done conversations on functional medicine, on toxins, on detoxing, on methylation. We've done a lot of different ones, and I'll put links to those in case somebody would like to catch up on some of those.
Very cool. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I have so much fun on these with you.
I do too. Thanks a lot, Dr. Matt. I really, really appreciate all that you do, and you're persevering. You're with the functional health team. It's a new concept, and it's something that kind of I've seen you go through lots of startup growing pains, and I'm really glad you've stuck with it, because I think it's something that can really help a lot of people.
Well, thank you much. It's a passion of mine, and it's a lot of fun. I will be very honest with you. I don't look at it as a job. It's passion. That's right. It's passion. It's
passion. Absolutely. My theory is that we spend way too many hours, quote unquote, working. It should be something you really enjoy. And, obviously not all of it's going to be fun, but a majority of it should really be, something that you're passionate about and fun for you to do.
I wanted to let a quick break happen, and I think I need to do just 2 minutes on this estrogen and breast cancer thing.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Cool. All right. So here we go. So one place to start in the conversation of breast cancer and estrogen is kind of this debate on, is breast cancer genetic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at human genome studies over the entire existence of humans, only the genome, has only changed 0.02% in all of human existence. Now, wrap your mind around that, right? I mean, it's minuscule.
Right.
So if you think, is it a problem of genetics? It's not as likely as is it a problem of the environment.
Right.
Because our environment, that has changed dramatically higher than 0.02%. So, and what we know is that the incidence, more information to back this up, the incidence of breast cancer in underdeveloped or less developed countries is super low, where in the higher developed countries it's super high. And you even mentioned earlier that why could that be with the liver problems? It's toxins. Our environment's more toxic with the more chemicals and the more industry we have. Okay, so these are really important factors to really help us understand that this problem of breast cancer really isn't a solely genetic associated issue. Now, before we get a bunch of backlash, we want to acknowledge that absolutely there are certain genetic SNPs, right, alterations in our genetics that can make a person more susceptible to cancer, to breast cancer, right? The famous one is the BRCA, right? BRCA1, BRCA2 gene. But these genes only appear in that cancerous form in about, and again, this is a rough number, but approximately 5% of breast cancer cases. So while it's a reality, it is not the dominant factor. Is really what we're saying here. And so it's what are the dominant factors are things like when estrogen is produced, it has to be broken down. We got to get rid of it. There's a balance to everything in our body. And the way that it's broken down is what's super important here. Okay. And so when we produce estrogen, there's three major types, let's say, of estrogens in the estrogen family, and the ratio of these to each other is very, very important. Okay. There's a very weak estrogen that when it's in higher concentrations, that weaker estrogen, what do you say estrogen does? It causes proliferation and growth of tissue. So when the weaker estrogen is in higher amounts, then we have less growth and proliferation of tissue. So the higher this ratio of the weaker estrogen to the stronger ones, or this estrogen quotient, as it's called, when it's when the number's higher and there's more of this weak, well, then your breast cancer risk is lower. So on the production end of how our estrogen balance is between these three in the body, that's one very important factor in breast cancer risk, right? We want more of the weaker estrogen in there. Now, on the detoxification, on the other side of the equation, where we're getting rid of the estrogens, again, there are some genetic factors here, because our enzymes in our liver, in our phase 1 of the liver, are our CYP enzymes. These there's 3 different ones that convert estrogen into metabolites that we're going to get rid of in our body, right? And we won't, we don't need to necessarily get into the nitty-gritty details of them, but these 3 different phase 1 enzymes, some of them, when they're upregulated, or they're operating at full speed, are going to produce literally compounds that protect you against cancer, protect you against the growth and development. Some of these same enzymes are blocked by alcohol and pesticides. Okay, they're the ones that produce the healthy estrogens. So there's another place where some of these, I guess we could say, toxins come in and can cause some issues. Other than that, once we have a healthy ratio of the breakdown components, once we've produced more of the cancer protective estrogen metabolites rather than the ones that literally will cause DNA damage, they can encourage tumor development. That's the flip side of that with some of those enzymes. Once that happens, then the methylation process, right? That's when phase 2 of the liver comes in, and the proper methylation of those metabolites is very important to the proper elimination of estrogens. And then so our methylation, say supplements, or our practices that people do, whether it's dietary and the leafy greens folates, or maybe they're taking pre-methylated versions of cobalamin or folates. This can be very supportive. Another thing that needs to be mentioned in terms of support here, though, is we can really upregulate the production of the protective forms of those estrogen breakdown chemicals, those metabolites, by using diindolylmethane, which you may have heard of before, but you definitely heard of the foods that it comes in, which are the cruciferous vegetables, our cauliflowers, our broccoli, our Brussels, those sorts of things.
Okay. Cool. Wow, we packed a lot in here.
Yeah, we did. We got it done.
And you thought this was going to be short.
Never.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We probably should wrap up, because people are going to look at this and go, "Oh my God, it's such a long one." But it's an important conversation. So thank you.
It is. Exactly right. Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. You take care. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yes.
Thank you for listening, and thank you so much, Dr. Matthew Flory, for taking time to share your extensive knowledge with us. The podcast website is realjanine.com, where you can listen to and download episodes. Sign up for the podcast bi-weekly blog newsletter to keep up on new episodes, archives, life updates, and healthy recipes. And remember, Janine is Janeean. To subscribe to Keeping It Real with Janine, go to iTunes or your favorite podcast provider. You can also listen to video slideshows of my conversations on the podcast YouTube channel. Find it by searching Real Janine. And remember, please subscribe. Do you know someone who would benefit from my conversation with Dr. Matt? I'm sure you do. So please share the love. Take care and be well.